But the focus of this talk is smart clothing. And my name is Dan Gaz. I'm an adjunct instructor. I've been at Concordia since 2010. Teach primarily, obviously in exercise science, but have primarily taught exercise physiology at the undergraduate and graduate level, and a couple other courses as they become available. My background is in exercise physiology. I went to Indiana University, did my undergrad and graduate work there, and I've worked at the Mayo Clinic since 2010 in a variety of roles, including and not including exercise science as the focal point. So happy to talk more about that, or if anybody has questions, they want to shoot me an email about kind of career path things. It's always interesting and important to talk to students about where they hope to go with this. No financial disclosures, so I don't have an affiliation with anything that's discussed in this presentation. But really wanted to talk about what smart clothing is at the very kind of basic 10,000 foot level, show you literally what it looks like and how it works. And I think the most important thing is, as exercise professionals, as students, what can we do with this? Is this something that we should start to look at, recommend? I've built in some questions, or sorry, caveats around, the use of some of these devices. But then would be interested in hearing any questions that you all might have after this presentation. So smart clothing is literally technology that's woven into wearable garments. So shirts, shorts, it's basically like textile electrodes that can be woven in. So certain companies do this, Nike, Adidas, other larger kind of who we think of as athletic clothing manufacturers do this. It typically takes a while to trickle down to the consumer. You've probably seen, like if you follow soccer or European football, a lot of their players wear particular types of wearable devices to track heart rate, output, hydration, all these different kinds of things. So we start to see this trickle down into the mainstream after it's been used in research or like sports or professional settings first. And they can really monitor anything that's exercise related, any type of physiological variable. We'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slide when we see some examples. But then also knowing that some of you might take this degree into more of a healthcare setting, we actually see a lot of these in research studies or in patient monitoring, things that can be woven into clothing, socks, even like sheets in a hospital bed to detect falls, detect edema in lower extremities, or other AEs. AEs are adverse events that could happen during a patient's stay in the hospital. And really, I think the biggest thing to know is that they're designed to feel comfortable on the skin. So it might sound like something woven into your shirt, your socks, underwear even, pants, shorts, whatever. It's designed to feel comfortable so that you literally don't or shouldn't notice that it's there while it's tracking these physiological variables. So if you've used like a 12-lead ECG, or if you had like a EEG cap on your brain, if you've been part of like research studies or needed to do that for sleep studies, those are super uncomfortable. We wouldn't want to exercise or lift weights or train with a lot of that bulky corded devices. So a lot of these devices are wireless, connect to a phone, connect to an app, connect to something that sends the signals from a Bluetooth to your phone, your app, whatever. And it's becoming quite a large subset of what the ACSM looks at as like trends upcoming. And I think they've noted, other groups have looked at like projecting how big this is going to get. And by 2028, even just smart textiles alone are going to be in like the 15 billion mark in terms of cost, what people will spend, what companies are going to invest into making these available. Affordable is kind of maybe one of those caveats. And also with like anything, there's a potential for some AI integration as well. So really what we're talking about is if you've got an Apple Watch, if you're used to like wearing a Fitbit, Garmin, Whoop, all these different types of things, we're now talking about the same wrist-based or chest-based in terms of heart rate monitors, those same types of tracking being built into clothing so that you can do your sport, do your activity more specifically, and get the same types of physiological variables without having to, have an Apple Watch or wear a Whoop or, any of those different kinds of things. So trying to integrate wearable technology into the clothing that we wear throughout the day or when we're exercising or playing, particular sports or activities. So here are some examples of what it actually looks like. So the top left, the top two pictures are more of like the clinical hospital setting. And I think it's important to differentiate between the two to see how they can be used, especially for potential career paths, future aspirations following your degree, your time at Concordia, but also just to see how, specifically clinical it can get in terms of the measures, but also then how it can get out to the Gen Pop in terms of things that you can purchase. So what you see on the top left, those are fiber optics that are integrated into a shirt to monitor skin circulation. And really the focal point there is to prevent bed sores, monitor heart rates. So we're thinking about patients that are in a hospital setting for a longer period of time to where they would need to move frequently so they don't have, bed sores, pressure ulcers from being in the same position. Top right, you see that gentleman zipping up a sock, looks like a compression sock, almost like a half sleeve that basketball players or other athletes would wear. This is a type of wearable, washable stocking that can be used to monitor edema in patients' legs. So particular conditions might lead to or cause edema. You can see that he's looking at what appears to be an iPad. So some type of signal, pressure, volume changes delivered, and likely the care team or someone in the hospital, or if he's at home, this information is being delivered remotely to someone monitoring his health, depending on his condition, so they can do some remote patient monitoring, but also then, react to any changes based on medications, conditions, those types of things. The stuff on the bottom row are what I found in terms of like commercially available devices and what their purposes are. So the bottom left, it's a company called Hexoskin, Hexoskin. So that's a shirt, almost looks like a weighted vest, but it's a shirt that has recording devices. So that's what you see in the bottom right. So that device clips onto the shirt, records ECG, respiration, and activity sensor. So you could wear this when you exercise, run, walk, whatever, but that's going to capture those types of data, send it to your phone, and you can use that to analyze it as you need to, or work with clients or work with folks that are exercising to look at that data. The one that I found the most interesting was the bottom middle. This is, I don't know how you pronounce it. It's NADI. So let's call it NADI, NADI X. And these are yoga pants, and they have embedded sensors that vibrate and also use accelerometers as you follow along a yoga program. The thought here is that it provides some kind of haptic feedback to guide you through yoga poses. So vibrations when you're slightly deviating from what they're expecting you to do. So really helping you learn yoga with some feedback mechanisms that are embedded in, pants or tights or yoga pants that you would wear during, a class. So following along to their delivered yoga classes, but also getting feedback to hopefully have some kind of loop to when things are, maybe slightly off kilter if you're doing, Warrior Two or some of these other yoga poses. So really interesting that can be embedded within a garment, but then tied to some real-time visuals, cues, auditory, and then take some of your own biofeedback and guide you towards a better yoga position. And then the bottom right, this is a company called Sensoria, and these are smart socks that have a microelectric sensor that counts steps, running speed, tracks calories for your workout, altitude, distance, as well as your cadence, your foot landing technique, and impact score. So I thought this one was interesting because they claim or purport that some of this information can also help with gait pattern alterations, prevent injury, predict injury based on, distance, cadence, foot landing technique. As we know, as we get fatigued, we might go from inversion to eversion, or, we might see that in certain types of terrain or climate, or, even shoes lead us to run suboptimally. So interesting to get that kind of feedback from a pair of socks. And you can see that clip just goes in there. So I'm guessing you can wash that without the clip in, even though it looks like there's some pins that needs to connect to. There's a lot of other examples. I thought that it'd be nice more to show kind of upper and lower extremities, different uses, different devices. The sky's the limit with these things. And you've probably seen other types of garments that can be worn or have seen, ads about them. Maybe you haven't worn them yourself. I think the biggest takeaway here is, recommendations for exercise professionals. So whether you're in school or obviously working at Concordia, like some of your professors and some of the faculty here, we're all for all intents and purposes, exercise professionals at this point in our educational or professional career. The things you want to think about is if you're working with a client or working with someone who talks to you about these, or now that you've seen this presentation, gosh, should I recommend this for everybody that I work with, or should I just kind of keep this in the back of my mind as a future modality or something that I could recommend to someone? You want to think first about cost. These range from $200 to $1,000. So I think on the previous page, the socks were the cheapest. The the shirt was the most expensive, and then the yoga pants were like $300. So I want to first think about cost. We want to think about the population that you're working with, or maybe the population that you're interested in applying these kinds of technologies to. Are you working with folks that are simply looking to increase their exercise adherence, looking to become more active, compared to, are you working with elite athletes where these types of things could get them the 1% change or whatever that could, totally transform or alter the trajectory of their career? So we want to think about who we're working with, and really, is this appropriate? Is this an appropriate population to start to apply really high-end technology? And will we see the improvement that we need to, versus just working within the fit principle and, changing intensity, changing volume, changing modality, those types of things. I'm always cognizant of like the learning curve, and does this become more of a distraction because now I've got to have something charged. I've got to make sure I've got Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, or make sure things get uploaded. I've got to now look at this data or analyze this data as the exerciser or as the personal trainer, exercise physiologist, exercise specialist. Will these things eventually just become deterrents to exercise? Whereas before, your clients might have just put on their shoes, a pair of shorts, and a workout shirt and gone for a walk or lifted weights, those types of things. So think about the population, but then also the population adherence to, flashy bells and whistles types of things. If you're working with a client and they've totally maxed out, their Whoop or their Apple Watch, and they're really looking for something more, start to think about, have those conversations. But really, there's a learning curve with this, and sometimes it can deter people from exercise because there's just too many things going on to get that one session done with all this data, with all these devices. And really, will it change behavior? Will knowing about foot strike when you go for your after dinner walk because you've got these, $200 socks, is that going to make someone, are they going to go more frequently? Are they going to keep the same behaviors? Having yoga pants for someone that is really into yoga, giving them that feedback, is that going to make them more or less likely to do yoga more often? So I think we're really thinking about, how does this change behavior? Does it increase? Does it decrease adherence? Is the population that you're working with or interested in the right population? And really, ultimately, the cost. And you have to think about something that's $1,000, start to break it down into like cost per use. Is this really going to be something that over the course of a year, are we going to see a benefit? Because can we use it every time we exercise? Maybe not, probably not. Are there a lot of these things that'll get in the way of adherence, use, or even just perceptions about, gosh, what if, they buy these running socks and it turns out they get way too much feedback that makes them think that, I'm slow. My foot strike is poor. I don't have the right cadence for what, whatever is recommended for the type of running I'm doing. And it also looks like I'm going to set myself up for injury. Sometimes that can be good information, but sometimes folks can kind of spiral and it can really lead them away from things that they typically enjoyed. So, it's a lot to think about. Ultimately, you'll be approached if you're working in, a population, whether it's a health club, wellness facility, working with patients, cardiac rehab, those types of things. You'll be approached because consuming things within exercise is just, everybody knows about wearable devices, and they're going to turn to you all for, questions, answers, opinions, thoughts. And I think the most important thing is to be mindful of the benefits, the risks, and how you can address each of those questions individually to the person that's asking, versus like providing a blanket recommendation and using, their experiences and what they're hoping to get out of them within that conversation. So, there's a lot out there. A lot of this will evolve, much as how like Fitbit was the main thing, and now there's so many wearable devices that track steps. And now we've got watches that do everything, and things that track sleep. So it's a moving target, moving field. I think we're just scratching the surface at where this can go. So I'd encourage you to do more research on this on your own if you're interested. There's some really good meta-analyses that I found in putting this together. There's also a really good paper that I don't think the sample size was big enough to maybe broadly spread, but really people's perceptions about wearing smart clothing, and it's basically a coin toss in terms of the population. Some folks don't want to do it because it's so specialized. Others want the data. So I think that's what you'll find with a lot of these wearable devices, whether they be with clothes or wrist worn or any of these other things. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing because I'm happy to answer any questions or anything that any of you have about wearable clothing and thoughts, or if you've encountered it, approached it, tried it, anything along those lines. I think it's really interesting to see where this will go, especially with artificial intelligence and a lot of the health and wellness and even at the clinical kind of hospital setting, things being directed towards AI. It'll be interesting to see where some of the big players like Under Armour and Nike and Adidas go with some of these at the consumer level.
Anybody own anything? Any wearable, either clothing or the watch? Yeah, just the watch. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a Whoop, and I know you can take that out of the wristband, and you can click it into. I think they have like a sports bra, and then like compression shorts or underwear, which is I think good for certain types of activities. But I mean, the Whoop is pretty much bomb-proof, so you don't really have to worry about it too terribly much. You can do a lot to it, and it stays pretty in shape in one piece. But other devices are much more sensitive, have some limitations to water resistance, water exposure. So
yeah, I had exposure, not necessarily to smart clothing, but I did some virtual physical therapy, and I had motion sensors, and one went on my forehead and one went on my chest. And how handy that it made it, they gamified it, right? So it would go ding, 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 ding. And I felt like I was in a casino. But that certainly made me want to like earn all my star points for the day, because I'm a person who's motivated by those numbers. But I also found myself, like you said, Dan, on the flip side, like getting obsessed about it then. Like, ooh, I only got 90 of my 100 points today. How come my neck didn't, how come what's wrong with my lateral flexion, whatever.
Yeah. And I wondered,
a double-edged sword.
I think there's a lot of this too. And I wonder how much of it, and this would be an interesting topic that we could, dive into in greater detail, but a lot of these wearable devices, I think, and if any of you have used these and felt the same way, I think there's a psychological component to it in which like it tells you how well you slept. And so if you see in the morning that, gosh, I felt like I slept great, 7 hours, whatever, and it tells you, boy, you really slept, like you're in the red when you thought you'd be in the green, to use kind of the Whoop's color coding. There's a psychological component to that where, well, I thought I felt good, but this thing says I should feel bad. So how do I deal with this? Like, do I just ignore it? Or do I just kind of override the governor and try to push through whatever this thing is telling me? Or do I use this as a day of recovery? So it's also interesting to see how that can affect even like first thing in the morning, your attitude and your approach. I mean, my wife and daughter and I were just in Hawaii for 9 days, and like every day was in the green. It's like, oh, this is great. But why is it in the green? Well, it's because like didn't set an alarm, slept until you wanted to, wasn't, you weren't eating. We never got adapted to the 5-hour time difference. So like we were going to bed at 8 o'clock. So, there was a lot of positives to that. So you think like on vacation, you're going to be doing things that you don't normally do, eating poorly, drinking differently, exercising less, moving less, but like we really weren't. So it was cool to see that reflect. And I also see the same thing when we go to Disney every year. You're walking at these parks for like 16 hours and you think you're going to be tremendously fatigued when you have a device tracking you, but like you tend to recover better when you're on vacation because you have less things that are stressing you out. So, so it's interesting how there's a psychological component to some of these wearable devices, independent of whether they're in your garments or on your wrist.
That also reminds me of just when you're wearing your Apple Watch, and sometimes you go on a bike ride without you actively pressing that you're exercising, and it doesn't count the minutes that you're exercising.
Yeah. So does it, it's like a tree falling in the woods, right? Does it really count?
Yeah.
And I think that's the one part that, certain devices work better than others in terms of like picking up exercise if you don't prompt it to like, I'm starting a bike ride.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool because some devices start to learn your patterns and it might not pick it up the first time, but if you do, a stationary bike ride Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, like it eventually will figure out what you're doing and how you're doing it, but it'll also pick things up really strangely too. Like I don't know how many of you have taken the shuttle from uh, near the Mall of America to the airport, like park your car and take the shuttle. That shuttle's pretty wild. Like they go really fast and it's bumpy. And on our last trip, it picked up that like 10-minute ride and it called it surfing. I don't know why. But like the algorithms built in there they're very accurate, but then they're also kind of funny because it's like, I wasn't like standing up. I was just sitting on a really bumpy bus that has no suspension. So this is now surfing, but you can I usually delete it, or all my stuff goes to Strava, so it's fun to see if anybody says, "Gosh, you were surfing in Bloomington at 6 a.m." Like, how do you do this? But I think it's very popular. Wearable devices. It's a tremendously researched area, but I think there's so much more that we can learn about it and know about it, and it'll change. So I would encourage all of you, as students and especially my colleagues at the faculty and instructor level, like we should really be, investigating these. You all should do, your own research on what fits best. I will tell you, I'm going to put this in the chat, but if you ever have like questions on devices that are sport related or health related that are wearables, this guy, I don't know his real name, but his website is DC Rainmaker, and he is an unbiased reviewer of like wearable technology to the nth degree. So he doesn't pay for anything. There's no ads on his website. This is basically his life, where he just reviews wearable exercise sports equipment. He gives you like heads up on like if there's a version 2 of the, when the new Apple Watch comes out, there's always like a cross grid comparison of here's what you're getting in the old one, here's what you're getting in the new one, or like, down to the degree of like GoPros. Like it's not technically exercise equipment, but like people use them as they work out. So it's a really good resource. It's not, by no means is it, scientifically vetted or whatever, but this guy has done a tremendous amount of work in the last 10 years to build up a reputation of unbiased reviews of wearable equipment. And it's a really good resource, especially around Prime Day, because he'll populate all the best products that are on sale. But then sometimes like there's a caveat to why a watch is going. Like I think there was a watch made by Sunto that was going on sale, and like I looked at it, I'm like, oh, this is great. And he said, but I wouldn't buy it because it's $100, but a new version is coming out. And this is why they're selling it, because the new version is going to be markedly better and worth like the $200 versus getting one that's like a generation behind. So there's some really cool stuff there. I mean, obviously we would use this with caution. This is one man's opinion, but I think he's built up a very good reputation in terms of not being kind of biased by or people paying him to say that things are good. I always keep it in my back pocket. I get friends that ask me all the time about like bike trainers or, what's the best this or that. And I usually find the link that he's talked about, look at it and say, I think you should just watch this 20-minute video instead of me like answering your questions and then telling you to go look at this video. But it's a good resource. It's really cool.
Awesome. Thank you. We want to honor your time, but students, you guys have any other questions?
What's like the exo shirt used for?
I mean, it can be used for anything, right? Like I think folks use it for if they're training for, running events, or if you're training for like a ruck or a hike. Like I think it's really just a way for someone to monitor physiological responses during exercise. The key to that is like, then what are you going to do with the data? Like, okay, so I burned X calories and I covered X distance and my heart rate was this. Like, it's okay to have data, but like we got to know what we're going to do with it. And so I think that's why, as a personal trainer, exercise professional, if your client has one of these things and they say, well, look, I just did this, it's like, that's up to us to then figure out, okay, is this part of like a training plan? Are they looking to accomplish a certain goal within a training plan? Or are we using this to like set some baseline measures because they have a goal of, hiking to the top of whatever, and this is what they're going to wear when they do it, so we can start to track changes longitudinally over time. So like anything, I think you need to ask yourself or talk to the clients about like, what are you hoping to use this for? What's the goal of using this? And then how do we take the data and then turn it into like some actionable goals, milestones along the process to get to your end goal? Because you're ultimately going to want to use that to track it. Can you cover the same distance in a shorter period of time? Is your heart rate during exercise or during that exercise getting lower, meaning you're getting fitter, your exercise capacity is growing? Or can you now, go faster, higher heart rate, but now you can cover more ground? So we're starting to see some physiological changes. So a lot of these things capture data very well. The hardest thing is then like, what do we do with it?
Mhm.
And that's even at the user level or at the trainer, coach, physiologist, whatever the title is that you hope to obtain. But it's really about using that data the most effectively to help your clients or help yourself accomplish whatever goals they're trying to accomplish with something that, they had to spend money on. That's a great question though, because like a lot of these things can do a lot of things. They can capture a lot of data points, elements, things, but it's ultimately how we use it and how we address it. I think, Jennifer, that might be a good additional topic or meeting we could have about like, now you have this, so what? Like
Right. You spent a lot of money on it because it seemed flashy, but are you using capability?
Yeah. No, it's kind of the cross that we have to bear within the fitness community, is that a lot of people buy things, but then the treadmill becomes a clothes hanger. So it's like, how do we use it, but how do we also use it to motivate people to stay with a program, with a lifestyle change versus training for a marathon and then being done with that stuff forever.